But again, nothing to the extent that says 2025 is not going to be an interesting year.
Hello, I'm John Jannarone, Editor-in-Chief of CorpGov. Very happy to be having my last interview. We said the best for last here in Orlando. We've got Bruce Goldfarb, who is the president and CEO of Okapi Partners. Bruce, great to have you back here again.
It is always great to be with you, John. Always fun to talk about the markets and what we do with you.
All right. So Bruce, of course, was in Palm Beach just 2 months ago, sat on a panel there. Bruce, first thing I had to ask, what's changed? Anything new in the last 60 days that we should be paying attention to?
Well, there's been a lot that's changed in the last few months, especially every year near the end of the year, you hit the cycle where companies have their advance notice bylaw provisions about to start or in process. And so with that moment, we are experiencing companies who are facing activist nominees. We're working with activists who are looking to put their nominations in place. There's a lot of activity. It seems to me that the very end of every year and the very beginning of the new year are quite busy, and this has really been no exception. Actually, if it's an exception, it's because we've been even busier in the last week or two.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, the market responded positively, it seemed, to Trump's election. It's been down a little bit since then. We were just talking in the green room. You're not a political expert, but this does come up with your clients from time to time. What are you seeing in terms of enthusiasm about activism and M&A?
Well, they're both going to be important in 2025. And some of that was pent-up demand in terms of the M&A activity, and some of it is just the natural cycle. Markets falling a little bit at the end of the year gives an activist a little more of an argument that change is needed. Moreover, when these situations are cyclical and they have to either be in a position where you're in a fish or cut bait because of the advance notice bylaw provisions, ultimate markets are less relevant to the process. It may impact whether you move forward. It may impact whether a company wants to settle. It may impact the sentiment of investors as you move toward a campaign, but it certainly wasn't anything with a chilling effect in December.
Gotcha.
Other than the weather.
Gotcha. And just one last question on this political stuff. There was a lot of uncertainty around these tariffs. Does that come up in your world when you're talking to clients?
Almost anything that impacts the markets will come up in terms of discussions with clients. Buyers want to understand, will it impact investor sentiment toward the deal? So we do end up discussing these issues, although, as you point out, I'm not a political expert, nor am I an economics expert. I studied history of art in college. But at the same time, we do talk with investors about these issues, and by and large, it doesn't change their decision about what they have to do, voting on processes, voting on governance issues, voting for board members. It may impact valuation of deals, but again, nothing to the extent that says 2025 is not going to be an interesting year.
Gotcha. Now, this is always my favorite example to bring up. So a decade ago, you and I both followed that Darden Restaurants case very closely. The whole board got swept. That was a very contentious fight. It went all the way to the vote. What I've noticed in the last year or two is a lot more, constructivist activity on the part of activists. Now, that's not to say we have had some larger-than-life figures like Nelson Peltz getting involved in Disney, but what's your prediction as far as how things are going to look? Do you think we're going to have these CNBC boxing matches between activists again, or do you think it's going to be more, handled in a more peaceful manner?
Anything can happen when you move into a new year. But what was different last year was some of these factors, knowing that the markets were uncertain. We had elections coming up that were not going to create certainty. So it was to a lot of advantage, certainly for an activist to achieve a settlement on grounds that are good for the activist, but also for the companies to put some certainty around how they're dealing with their investors and move forward. And I think we all recognize that activists can bring good ideas to a company. What's changed over the decade And by the way, I was here in this building, as were you, for the Darden proxy fight. What's changed in that decade has been the perception of whether or not an activist can be constructive toward a company. And I think there have been more situations where companies and their advisors will be able to recognize that there are some great ideas out there, and activists bring many great ideas because they are, by and large, deep value research investors. They study companies to very significant nitty-gritty levels, and they come forward prepared. And they say, here's our ideas. There's situations where management won't agree.
Yeah.
There's situations where management vehemently won't agree. And those are going to be the proxy fights. And in many instances, you learn who's right or wrong a few years later or many years later. And it seems to me that things have worked out great for Darden. Whether things work out so well for Disney, time's still there. It's, something to be seen. The other difference, John, has been that we've now come to accept the way the universal proxy card works, and we have less fear that it's going to tip the world upside down, that it's really just part of the plumbing. And so we now know that both sides can find the best director nominees, and very frequently all investors appreciate that. And I think the parties can evaluate the candidates before you have to go to a vote and have a situation where we achieve a collectively mutual settlement.
You reminded me of the panel in Palm Beach where our friend Keith Rosenblum was talking about his suggestions are a gift to the company. So maybe some of them actually view it that way. Not always, though.
I think it's hard. Look, accepting gifts sometimes is hard to do. Sometimes you get a gift that ultimately you really like, but your first reaction is, oh, I don't know if I really need this, and or this isn't exactly the color of the sweater that I wanted. And so sometimes you have to you have to try it on, you have to look in the mirror, but it can be a real gift.
One last question for you, Bruce. In past years, I remember looking at companies, say, 500 million-ish market cap, and they would say, activists aren't going to bother with us, we're too small. That's not the case, is it? I mean, are those companies actually taking steps, among the board directors saying we need to be ready if someone comes knocking?
500 million. Yeah. Those are absolute targets for activists. First of all, the question is, are they a $500 million company because they used to be a $2 billion or a $10 billion company? And is there still value to be extracted? And if the answer is yes, then you are certainly going to be on an activist screen. Also appreciate that we are now in a moment where we've had a number of activists, what have been described as celebrity activists, looking to move on potentially. They've retired, or their funds have gotten so large that they're not looking at those companies. However, there are people who've been trained by those masters who've now set up their own funds. They have fewer assets under management, and those kind of 500 million to 2 billion market cap companies are the sweet spot for a newer activist.
Great. We're going to leave it there, Bruce. Always good to have you on. Oh, I got to point out, I almost forgot. Congrats, Bruce, to Okapi Partners for being ranked by Bloomberg as the #1 proxy solicitor in activism 2024. Another good award for you. We're going to leave it there. I'm John Jannarone, Editor-in-Chief of CorpGov, signing off from Orlando, Florida.